Frank Howard hit 382 home runs. Numbers that impressive should have earned him a permanent place in Cooperstown. Instead, that achievement brought him nothing more than a single line bearing his name on the ballot, followed by silence. No one has ever fully explained why. How could a man swing with such force that he leaves a permanent mark on an empty, silent stadium and yet still nearly be erased from the memory of this very sport? Frank Oliver Howard was born in Columbus, Ohio, the third of 6 children. His father was a large man himself, a machinist for a railway company who had once played semi-professional baseball on the weekends. It was John who first put a bat in his son's hands, and it was John who kept encouraging him year after year, even when nobody outside their neighborhood had any reason to notice. The Howard household was not wealthy. There was always food on the table, but if the children wanted spending money, they earned it themselves. Frank shined shoes. He carried golf bags for tips. He took on whatever manual labor a boy his size could manage, and his size was already becoming impossible to ignore. At 14 years old, he took a job most grown men would have found exhausting. He operated a heavy jackhammer on the streets of Columbus for the city itself, breaking up pavement for roughly $1.50 an hour. I was glad to get it, he remembered decades later, without a trace of bitterness. By the time he reached South High School, Frank already stood 6 feet 5 inches tall, a full head above his classmates, his shoulders filling out from years of physical labor rather than any gym. He excelled in 2 sports at once, basketball and baseball, though he never once bothered with football. Teachers and neighbors already whispered that this quiet, oversized kid might be something special. Nobody yet knew which sport would claim him. At Ohio State University, Frank Howard became something rare, a genuine 2-sport star. On the basketball court, he averaged nearly 17 points and close to 14 rebounds a game across 3 seasons, earning consensus All-American honors along the way. He still holds one of the most remarkable records in the program's history, 32 rebounds in a single game against Brigham Young University, a number modern players rarely approach even today. On the baseball diamond, he was just as dangerous, batting close to 366 in his best college season and earning All-American recognition there as well. Professional basketball came calling first. The Philadelphia Warriors selected him in the National Basketball Association draft, a serious offer to play professionally at the highest level of a sport he clearly loved. He turned it down. Baseball scouts had been circling Frank for years by then, and one in particular, a Dodgers scout named Cliff Alexander, had built real trust with the family. According to Alexander's own recollection, Frank called him personally with news that a rival team had offered a bonus of $120,000. Frank did not simply take the higher number elsewhere. Instead, he asked Alexander for $108,000, explaining exactly how he wanted it divided, $100,000 for himself and $8,000 set aside for a new house for his parents. Alexander agreed. Frank Howard signed with the Los Angeles Dodgers in the summer of 1958, walking away from Ohio State just 1 semester short of his college degree in physical education. Frank Howard made his major league debut on a September afternoon in 1958, only 22 years old, facing the Philadelphia Phillies. In his very first game, he already delivered a home run. For the next 2 seasons, Howard mostly watched from the bench, a platoon player buried on a deep Dodgers roster under manager Walter Alston. Then, in 1960, everything changed. He won the National League Rookie of the Year award, beating out 2 future stars who would themselves eventually reach the Hall of Fame. 3 years later came the moment every young ballplayer dreams about. The Dodgers reached the World Series against the New York Yankees, and in the very first game, Howard smashed a double so long it remains the farthest ever hit at Yankee Stadium. Then, in the decisive 4th game, with the score tied and the whole season balanced on a single swing, he drove a home run 450 feet into the upper deck at Dodger Stadium, breaking the tie and lifting Los Angeles to victory. Koufax closed out the game on the mound, and the Dodgers completed a clean sweep of the mighty Yankees. Asked afterward about the towering blast that had just won his team a championship, Howard answered with the kind of modesty that would define him for the rest of his life. "I have hit several balls further than that," he told reporters, almost brushing off the biggest swing of his career. It should have been the beginning of everything. Instead, it was followed almost immediately by the darkest stretch of his playing days. The very next season, 1964, Howard's batting average collapsed to a career low, and his frustration with limited playing time under Alston boiled over completely. At only 28 years old, he seriously considered walking away from baseball entirely, threatening to take a steady job in a box factory back in Green Bay, where his young family had settled during his early minor league years. He did not quit. He finished out the miserable season, still unsure whether the game even wanted him anymore. What Frank Howard could not have known, sitting in that Los Angeles clubhouse feeling discarded, was that the worst season of his career was about to become the exact reason his greatest years were still ahead of him, in a city that had never once seen a winning baseball team. In December of 1964, the Dodgers traded Frank Howard to the Washington Senators, an expansion franchise that had never finished higher than ninth place and had never once threatened 100 wins in a season. On paper, it looked like a demotion. In reality, it was the only thing Howard had ever wanted, the chance to play every single day. Washington fell in love with him almost immediately. Teammates had already been calling him Hondo since his rookie year, a nod to an old John Wayne film, but the city gave him two new names entirely its own, the Washington Monument and the Capitol Punisher, titles that spoke to both his towering size and the damage he inflicted on opposing pitchers. Those nicknames belied a gentler truth. Frank Howard was kind to absolutely everyone around him, with one notable exception, the men standing on the pitcher's mound. Between 1967 and 1970, Howard found himself locked in an unforgettable home run duel with Minnesota's Harmon Killebrew, the two sluggers trading the American League home run title back and forth almost every season. In May of 1968, Howard produced one of the most astonishing hot streaks the sport had ever witnessed, 10 home runs in just 20 times at bat. That same season, he became only the fourth player in history to hit a ball clean over the roof in left field at Detroit's Tiger Stadium, a feat shared with just a small handful of the game's most feared hitters. Then, in the spring of 1969, everything shifted again. Ted Williams' year retirement to manage the Senators, and he called Howard into his office almost immediately. Williams believed the big man was swinging at far too many bad pitches, and he set out to teach him patience. "I did it without even trying to walk," Howard later said of his new approach. "I was ready to hit if it was my pitch, but if it was something other than what I was looking for, I took it." The transformation was remarkable. His strikeouts dropped sharply while his walks nearly doubled, and Howard delivered the finest all-around season of his career, finishing among the league leaders in nearly every offensive category. The following year, 1970, he led the American League outright in both home runs and runs batted in, punctuating the season with a home run estimated at 500 feet into the upper deck at Washington's ballpark. That swing left more than just a memory. Stadium workers painted the exact seat white to mark where the ball landed, and decades later, long after the Senators had left town, long after the stadium hosted an entirely different sport, that white seat remained a quiet, permanent signature of the most feared hitter Washington baseball had ever known. By 1972, the Senators were gone. The franchise relocated to Texas and became the Rangers, and in the very first game the new team ever played, it was Frank Howard who delivered its first home run. He was no longer the overwhelming force he had once been. Midway through that season, the Rangers traded him to the Detroit Tigers, who were fighting for a division title and needed his experience down the stretch. He delivered, driving in runs at a steady pace and helping push Detroit into the postseason. The following year, 1973, would be his last in the major leagues. On a September afternoon at Fenway Park in Boston, Frank Howard hit his final career home run, number 382, sailing it over the famous left field wall against a left-handed pitcher named Bill Lee. It was a quiet, almost gentle way to close out 16 seasons of thunder. Released by the Tigers at the end of that year, Howard was not quite ready to let go. He signed with a Japanese club, hoping for one more chapter on the other side of the world. It ended almost before it began. He injured his knee just before the season opener, played a single game, and walked away from professional baseball for good. There was no grand farewell tour, no ceremony built around his final swing. One of the most feared hitters of his generation simply finished, quietly, far from home. It would have been easy, at that moment, to assume the story of Frank Howard was over. In truth, one of the more surprising chapters of his life, the one that would define how an entire generation remembered him, had barely even started. Frank Howard could not stay away from the game he loved, even after his playing days ended. For more than 30 years, almost without interruption, he remained in a major league uniform, no longer as a feared slugger, but as a coach, a mentor, and briefly, a manager. He led the San Diego Padres for a single season in 1981 and the New York Mets for part of a season 2 years later. Neither stint produced a winning record, and both ended quickly. Yet something remarkable happened after he left each organization. Within just a few seasons, both the Padres and the Mets reached the World Series, built largely around the same young talent Howard had spent years quietly developing. He never received a ring for either run. He simply moved on to the next clubhouse, the next group of nervous young players who needed someone patient in their corner. His coaching journey carried him through one clubhouse after another, the Milwaukee Brewers, the Seattle Mariners, the New York Yankees, and the Tampa Bay Devil Rays among them. Between 1976 and 2008, there was only a single year in which he was not wearing some team's uniform. Few men in the sport's history spent so many seasons quietly building other people's careers instead of chasing their own name in headlines. Everyone who played alongside him seemed to reach for the exact same phrase to describe him: gentle giant. He was the ultimate teammate, longtime friend, and former teammate Dick Bosman once said, "Next to my dad, he's the greatest guy I know." The New York Mets organization, decades later, echoed the same sentiment, describing him as one of the most kind and generous individuals ever to wear their uniform, despite being one of the most intimidating figures anyone had ever seen standing at home plate. Fans who met him long after his playing career often told a similar story. He signed autographs without hesitation, refused payment for them, and treated strangers, especially children, as though meeting them was the highlight of his day. There was a quiet, almost stubborn generosity running through all of it. A man who had once frightened major league pitchers spent the back half of his life making absolutely certain nobody around him ever felt small, a gentle contradiction that those who knew him never once found strange at all. For all his power, Frank Howard never received baseball's highest individual honor. When his name appeared on the Hall of Fame ballot, voters cited his complete lack of speed, his high strikeout totals at a time when the game still frowned heavily on missing pitches, and his uneven defense in the outfield. He did not receive enough support to stay on the ballot beyond that single year. It is a strange footnote for a man whose home run total, at the moment he retired, ranked among the highest of any right-handed hitter in the sport's entire history. Nearly every player who had hit more home runs than him by that point already had a place in Cooperstown or would eventually earn one. Frank Howard simply did not. Washington, however, never forgot him the way official history seemed to. In August of 2016, decades after his playing career ended, the city finally gave him a permanent tribute. He was inducted into the Washington Nationals Ring of Honor, the only player from the entire 1961 through 1971 Senators era to ever receive the distinction. A bronze statue of him, standing 8 feet tall, was later placed just outside the ballpark itself. "I'm not one to live in the past," Howard said at the ceremony, "but any time you have a chance to be part of that kind of honor, it's a real thrill for me." He died on the 30th of October, 2023, at 87 years old, following complications from a stroke. What happened next felt almost too precise to be coincidence. Just 2 days later, the Texas Rangers, the very franchise whose first home run in team history had come off his bat half a century earlier, won their first World Series championship. The man who gave that franchise its opening moment of glory missed its final one by 48 hours. He never got to see it. And yet, in a quiet way, he had already been there from the very beginning, long before anyone else believed the Rangers could ever become champions at all. 382 home runs, a World Series ring, 4 All-Star selections, and still, for decades, a name that barely registered outside of Washington. It would be easy to call that unfair, and in many ways, it was. But spend enough time with Frank Howard's story, and a different lesson starts to emerge, one that has very little to do with plaques or ballots at all. Greatness, as it turns out, was never only measured by the numbers etched into a record book. It also lived in a 14-year-old boy who never complained about hard labor, in $8,000 quietly set aside for his parents' house, in a manager who taught young players patience he never fully received credit for teaching, and in a giant of a man who made absolutely certain no child who approached him for an autograph ever left feeling small. Today, his statue stands just outside the ballpark in Washington, towering over fans the same way he once towered over opposing pitchers, gentle even in bronze. It asks a quiet question of everyone who walks past it, whether a life measured only by trophies was ever really the point at all. Frank Howard never got his place in Cooperstown, but somewhere between a jackhammer in Columbus and a white seat in an empty stadium, he built something that outlasted the ballot entirely.